What would you do if the person you trusted most looked at you with cold eyes and kicked you out of your own home? What if that same night he held a $500 million lottery ticket in his hand and believed he had just won everything? I walked away with a small bag, my heart shattered, and nowhere to go, while he celebrated a future without me. But here's the truth, the part that changes everything. The $500 million winning lottery ticket he was holding was mine. If you believe that truth always finds its way back, hit the like button. If you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or treated as disposable, share this video. And subscribe to the channel, because what happened next proves that patience, dignity, and integrity always win in the end.
My husband kicked me out of our home the same night he believed he had become a millionaire. $500 million. Those words echoed through the living room like a verdict. Final. Irreversible. Not a proclamation of joy, but of exposure. As the lottery numbers crawled across the television screen, glowing blue against the dark, I watched his face change. It wasn't happiness that bloomed there. It was possession, calculation, a sharpness that made my stomach tighten. He didn't look at me. He didn't laugh or cry or ask me to check the numbers again. He stood up slowly, as if gravity itself had shifted in his favor, and raised his arms in silent triumph. In that moment, I realized something devastating. He was already alone. I had already been erased from the future he was imagining. "You hear that?" he said finally, his voice trembling, not with gratitude, but with authority. "We're rich. We." The word sounded strange coming from his mouth. I reached for him instinctively, years of habit guiding my hand, but he stepped away. His eyes flicked toward me then, not with love, not even with surprise, but with scrutiny, as if I were a problem he had just realized he could afford to solve. "You know," he said slowly, "this changes things." Within minutes, the man I had shared a life with for over a decade became someone else entirely. He spoke of lawyers, investments, new houses, new people. He spoke of freedom, and somewhere in that monologue, I understood that freedom did not include me. He accused me of holding him back, of being temporary, of not fitting into the life he now deserved. When I tried to remind him of who we were, of the years, the sacrifices, the quiet loyalty, he laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Pack a bag," he said. "You don't belong here anymore." I stood there, numb, as he opened the door and waited. No argument, no hesitation, just certainty. The kind that comes when someone believes money has rewritten the rules of morality. So I left, barefoot, carrying nothing but my phone and the strange calm that arrives when shock runs out of tears. What he never knew, what no one watching that broadcast could have imagined, was that the winning ticket wasn't his. It was mine. I had bought it days earlier, after work, with money I had saved quietly over months. Money I earned. Money I kept separate because some part of me, small but alert, had learned not to trust completely. I had folded the ticket carefully, written my name on the back in neat ink, and hidden it inside a book I knew he never touched. Not because I expected to win, but because it felt like a promise. Something just for me. As I sat in my sister's spare room that night, the television replaying the numbers again and again, I pulled the ticket from my bag. My hands were steady as I checked. Once, twice, 3 times, every number matched, $500 million. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't scream or cry. I just sat there breathing, as the truth settled into place. That night didn't make me rich. It made me free. It exposed the greed that had been quietly growing in the man I married. It revealed how conditional his love had always been, how easily it dissolved the moment he believed he no longer needed anyone. Before a single dollar was claimed, before any lawyer was called, before any headline was written, I lost my home. But I gained something far more valuable, the truth. And this time, it belonged to me. The change in him was immediate and merciless, as if a switch had been flipped and whatever humanity I once knew had been cut off without hesitation. The man who used to whisper plans about the future, who once spoke in we and us, suddenly addressed me like an inconvenience he had tolerated for far too long. His voice lost its warmth, his patience evaporated. Every sentence carried an edge of entitlement that stunned me. He spoke endlessly about his future, his money, his life. The words fell from his mouth with astonishing ease, as if my absence from that future had already been finalized. I wasn't being excluded. I had already been erased. It was as though wealth had granted him permission to rewrite history, to pretend that I had never been part of the journey that led him there. Within days, affection disappeared completely. Where there had once been familiarity, there was irritation. Where there had been partnership, there was contempt. Every look he gave me felt evaluative, dismissive, as though he were wondering why I was still there at all. I walked through the house like a ghost, careful not to provoke his impatience, watching the man I married turn into someone unrecognizable. Then came the sentence that still reverberates inside me, sharp and final. "Pack your things. You don't belong here anymore." There was no conversation, no attempt at explanation, no trace of compassion. He didn't thank me for the years I stood beside him when his pockets were empty and his dreams were fragile. He didn't acknowledge the sacrifices, the compromises, the quiet ways I had held our life together. He didn't ask where I would go or how I would survive. In his mind, money had rewritten morality. It had absolved him of loyalty, of empathy, of responsibility. As I packed my belongings, each item felt heavier than it should have. A sweater I wore on our first trip. A book we once read together. Ordinary objects transformed into silent witnesses. Proof that devotion means nothing to someone who worships power. Every folded shirt was a reminder that love, to him, had always been conditional. Still, I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I carried my pain quietly, swallowing the ache that pressed against my chest with every step toward the door. And deeper still, carefully protected beneath the grief and disbelief, I carried my secret. One he never suspected. One that would change everything, just not in the way he imagined. That first night after being expelled from my own home broke something inside me and rebuilt something stronger in its place. I slept on a couch that wasn't mine, wrapped in silence that felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. The room was dark, but my mind was mercilessly awake. I stared into the ceiling, into the thick, suffocating quiet of betrayal, replaying every moment that had led me there, every sacrifice I had made without being asked, every compromise disguised as love, every time I had chosen harmony over my own dignity. My chest ached as if grief had weight. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the delayed impact of shock finally settling into my body. I had lost my home, my marriage, and the illusion that loyalty is always returned in equal measure. And yet, beneath the pain, something unexpected began to surface. Clarity. For the first time, I saw the truth without sentiment clouding it. Being abandoned by someone who never truly valued me was not a loss. It was a release. I wasn't rejected. I was freed from a version of myself that had survived by shrinking. The love I thought I had lost was never stable enough to protect me in the first place. I wasn't destroyed that night. I was stripped down to my core. Everything superficial, expectations, fear, dependency, fell away. What remained was raw, exposed, and surprisingly unbroken. In that rawness, I discovered resilience. Quiet, unapologetic, mine. Somewhere nearby, folded carefully and resting exactly where I had placed it, the ticket remained safe with me, untouched. Not as a weapon, not as revenge, not as leverage against the man who had already shown me who he was. It existed simply as truth, as proof that life sometimes waits patiently, sometimes painfully, for you to choose yourself before it offers anything in return. And in that dark room, on that unfamiliar couch, I understood something that changed me forever. I had already won. In the days that followed, humiliation tried to follow me like a shadow, quiet, persistent, always just behind my steps. Mutual friends stopped calling, their silence louder than any accusation. Conversations I was no longer part of continued without me, filled with half-truths and convenient assumptions. Support dissolved into whispers, and whispers hardened into judgment. He told his version of the story loudly and often. He framed himself as a self-made man finally stepping into the life he deserved, unburdened by the past. In his narrative, I was an obstacle, a chapter best forgotten. People listened, some nodded, others smiled politely. Very few questioned him. It was easier to admire confidence than to search for truth. I walked through it all silently. I refused to defend myself to people who never bothered to ask for my truth. I learned that explanations offered to the wrong audience only deepen the wound. Silence, when chosen deliberately, became my protection. My dignity did not depend on being believed. It depended on remaining intact. That was when I understood something essential. Dignity is built when no one applauds. It grows in private moments, in restraint, in the decision not to trade self-respect for validation. I stopped watching who had turned away and focused instead on what remained within my control. Survival became my priority. Healing became my discipline. Regaining authority over my own thoughts became my quiet rebellion. I rebuilt myself in small, uncelebrated ways: steady routines, honest reflection, patience with my own grief. Every tear I shed sharpened my resolve. Every insult I absorbed without retaliation hardened my focus. Pain stopped being something that weakened me and became something that refined me. Slowly, clarity replaced bitterness. I began to understand a truth that felt both sobering and freeing. Money doesn't create monsters. It unmasks them. It doesn't corrupt character. It exposes it. What he revealed to the world was not a transformation, but a confession. Power simply gave him the confidence to stop pretending. And while he was busy showing everyone who he truly was, I was doing something far more important. I was rediscovering who I had always been. Standing alone in front of the mirror one morning, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not because she was broken, but because she was awakening. Her eyes held a steadiness I had never noticed before. The softness that once bent itself to please had been replaced by something firmer, calmer. I saw strength where fear had once taken root. I saw clarity where confusion had ruled for years, clouding my instincts and dulling my voice. For the first time, I wasn't searching my reflection for reassurance. I was meeting myself as an equal. In that still moment, something settled deep within me. I finally understood that true wealth has nothing to do with numbers flashing across a screen or headlines announcing a fortune. Real wealth lives elsewhere, in self-respect earned through hard choices, in patience cultivated through pain, in the courage to walk away without begging to be chosen. My husband believed he had won the lottery. He believed luck had crowned him victorious. In reality, he had already lost something priceless. He lost a woman who loved him before success, before money, before admiration from strangers. A woman who believed in him when belief was inconvenient, who stood beside him when there was nothing to gain. He lost a presence that could not be replaced by luxury or status because it was rooted in loyalty, not opportunity. And soon he would lose more. Not through revenge, not through confrontation, but through the quiet, unavoidable arithmetic of life. Because life has a way of restoring balance. It doesn't rush. It doesn't announce itself. It simply waits for the moment when truth can no longer be ignored. And when that truth finally surfaced, it would not scream. It would simply stand, calm, complete, and undeniable. Being forced out of my life did not break me. It exposed how long I had been surviving instead of truly living. Each morning after that carried a familiar heaviness, but beneath it pulsed something new. Purpose. The days were no longer shaped around anticipating someone else's moods or performing love for a man who had proven how easily I could be discarded. I was no longer shrinking myself to fit into a space where I was merely tolerated, never cherished. The absence hurt, but it also liberated. The pain was real. There were moments it caught in my throat, moments it stole my breath without warning. But so was the awakening. And unlike pain, awakening doesn't ask permission. It insists. Survival sharpened my perception. I began to see things clearly, perhaps for the first time. I noticed how silence can feel louder than words. How freedom is terrifying at first, especially when you've been conditioned to believe your value depends on someone else's approval. Independence didn't arrive gently. It arrived like a storm, stripping away what was familiar and leaving only what was true. I moved through those days quietly, deliberately. I didn't announce my strength or explain my restraint. I carried my secret not with fear, but with intention. I understood then that timing is not hesitation, it is protection. Some truths are powerful enough to require silence until the moment they can no longer be dismissed. And while he celebrated loudly, surrounded by noise, applause, and loyalty that shimmered only on the surface, I was doing something far more consequential. I was rebuilding myself with precision. I was cultivating stillness where there had once been doubt. I was restoring the one thing most dangerous to his illusion: clarity. What shocked me most was not his betrayal, but the strength that surged through me the moment I stopped begging to be understood. For years, I had underestimated myself. I mistook patience for weakness, believing endurance was the same as peace. I confused silence with harmony, never realizing how often I was quiet, simply to keep things from falling apart. Losing everything stripped away every excuse I had used to stay small. When there was nothing left to protect, there was finally nothing left to fear. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped seeking validation from people who had already chosen comfort over truth. And in that stillness, something remarkable happened. I became focused. I educated myself relentlessly. I studied laws, contracts, and lottery regulations with careful precision. I read fine print the way others read headlines. Knowledge stopped being abstract. It became my shield. Strategy became my language. Every detail mattered, and I treated each one with respect. I was no longer reacting from emotion or pain. I was moving deliberately, thoughtfully, with intention. While he spent extravagantly, intoxicated by attention and addicted to validation, I chose restraint. While he chased admiration, I invested in stability. While he sought applause, I built discipline and foresight. Our paths diverged completely, his fueled by noise, mine by clarity. That was when I learned a truth that changed the way I understood power. Real power does not announce itself with arrogance. It does not seek permission or recognition. It waits, it observes, it prepares. And when it finally moves, it does so quietly, without doubt, without hesitation, and with absolute certainty. There were nights when doubt tried to poison my resolve, nights when exhaustion crept in softly, whispering that revealing the truth immediately would end the pain faster, that confrontation would bring relief. In those moments, silence felt heavy, and patience felt like punishment. But I learned to recognize that voice for what it was: not wisdom, but weariness. Growth rarely rewards impatience. It favors those willing to endure discomfort without abandoning direction. So when my resolve wavered, I anchored myself in reminders I had written by hand, simple truths meant to steady me when emotions threatened to take control. I was not abandoned. I was released. I was not unlucky. I was prepared. I repeated those words until they felt less like affirmations and more like facts. The woman who once questioned her intuition now trusted it without hesitation. I had lived the consequences of ignoring my inner voice, of explaining away warning signs in the name of love. That education had been costly, and I refused to pay that price again. Each quiet night became a lesson in restraint. The ticket remained untouched, not because I was afraid of what would happen next, but because I respected the process unfolding around me. Some outcomes lose their power if forced too early. Some truths demand the right conditions to land with full weight. I understood then that truth does not require urgency. It does not panic or rush to be seen. It waits for alignment, when timing, clarity, and consequence meet. And when that moment arrives, truth doesn't argue. It simply stands. From a distance, I watched his world begin to crack under the weight of its own illusion. Publicly, everything appeared flawless. Luxury cars lined driveways. Invitations arrived constantly. Photographs captured smiles that suggested triumph and belonging. To anyone watching from the outside, he looked untouchable, proof that money could rewrite destiny. Privately, chaos ruled. Trust eroded almost immediately. The people surrounding him came with open hands, not open hearts. Conversations were transactional, loyalty temporary. Every laugh carried an agenda. Every compliment demanded something in return. The more he tried to secure control, the more unstable everything became. Slowly, his confidence mutated into paranoia. He questioned motives. He guarded excessively. He watched everyone closely, yet trusted no one. Money didn't soothe the emptiness inside him. It amplified it. Where there had once been insecurity, there was now fear. Where there had once been ambition, there was restlessness. Wealth magnified what character could not sustain. Watching it unfold brought me no satisfaction, no vindication, no desire to say I told you so. What I felt instead was confirmation, quiet, undeniable confirmation that truth always reveals itself without intervention. Because when someone builds their identity on power instead of character, collapse is not a possibility, it is an inevitability. What once felt like rejection began to reveal itself for what it truly was: rescue. I had not been discarded from something valuable. I had been removed from something corrosive. The pain that once consumed me softened into understanding. I was no longer grieving a marriage. I was grateful to have escaped it. One evening, standing beneath city lights that no longer intimidated me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace without conditions. The streets hummed with life, indifferent to my presence, and yet I moved through them with a quiet certainty I had never known. Nothing had been resolved yet, no confrontation, no vindication, but everything had shifted inside me. I trusted myself fully. I understood my worth, my timing, and my purpose. I knew that when the truth finally emerged, it would not be about humiliation or revenge. It would be about restoration, about reclaiming not just money, but agency, voice, and dignity. The parts of myself I had once subordinated to someone else's ego. In that moment, clarity hit me like a beam of sunlight cutting through fog. The most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is not to retaliate. It is to outgrow the version of yourself they tried to control, to evolve silently into someone they no longer recognize. And I was already far beyond her. The frightened, accommodating woman who once begged for approval, who once shrank to fit someone else's expectations. She no longer existed. I was whole. I was vigilant. I was unstoppable. And the world, with all its noise and chaos, would have no choice but to recognize it in its own time. The decision to step forward came quietly, without fanfare, without drama. There was no fire left to fuel me, no anger, no need to punish, only certainty. One morning, I woke with a calm so deep it felt foreign, as if my soul had finally caught up with my mind. It was a silence that carried weight, a stillness that whispered, "You are ready." I dressed deliberately, not to impress, not to perform, but to honor the woman who had endured everything and emerged intact. Every choice, every restraint, every sacrifice had led to this moment. When I walked into the legal office, the envelope in my hands was heavier than its paper and ticket content suggested. It carried more than evidence. It carried every night I had cried in silence, every time I had been dismissed, every ounce of strength I had painstakingly rebuilt alone. It carried the quiet accumulation of resilience. As I laid it on the table, I felt the room shift. The air became taut with recognition. The professionals across from me no longer saw just a dispute. They saw truth. It didn't need explanation. It didn't need justification. It simply existed, undeniable. I wasn't asking for validation. I wasn't performing closure for anyone else. I was claiming alignment, with myself, with reality, with the life I had carefully reconstructed. In that moment, I understood something essential. Justice does not hurry. It does not bend to impatience. It arrives not when it is demanded, but when you are ready to stand fully without trembling, without apology, without fear. And for the first time in years, I knew I was ready. As the legal process unfolded, memories resurfaced, not to wound me, but to teach me. They arrived with surprising clarity, unclouded by grief or rage, revealing patterns I had once accepted as normal. The silence that had stretched between us, the control disguised as protection, the subtle, almost imperceptible erosion of my voice over the years. Once these had felt like ordinary inconveniences, small compromises for the sake of love. Now, seen through the lens of distance and perspective, they were lessons, hard-earned, undeniable lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and perception. Instead of shame, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the awakening that had been quietly accumulating beneath years of fear and acquiescence. I realized that staying silent forever, ignoring my instincts, suppressing my truth, would have been the final betrayal. Not by him, but by myself. This journey had never been about proving him wrong. It was about proving, above all else, that I could trust my intuition again, that I could honor my own voice, my own discernment, without hesitation or apology. The woman who had once feared solitude now understood that being alone had saved her. Survival had transformed into self-respect, solid and unwavering. And self-respect, in turn, had evolved into power. Quiet, deliberate, undeniable. For the first time, I wasn't just enduring life. I was commanding it. When the truth began to surface, it did not explode. It unfolded, quietly, methodically, with the precision of a tide eroding a cliff. Records were examined, signatures compared, timelines reconstructed. Each fact chipped away at the illusion he had built so confidently, like a fortress of sand against the tide of reality. Questions emerged where certainty once stood. Doubt replaced arrogance, creeping in slowly, imperceptibly, until even his bravado could not mask it. I remained in the background, untouched by the chaos, anchored in patience. I did not need to intervene, to explain, to defend myself. Facts do not argue. Facts do not plead. They simply exist, immutable and undeniable. And as reality steadily caught up with the story he had sold to the world, I felt no rush of triumph, no desire for spectacle, no need to claim victory, only stillness. Because I understood finally what I had always suspected. Truth, once released, does not need witnesses to assert its power. It does not demand applause. It does not seek revenge. It simply stands, unassailable, waiting for those willing to see it. And in that quiet, I felt the culmination of everything I had endured, not as a vindication of anger, but as a testament to patience, to clarity, and to the resilience of a woman who had learned that power is not loud. It is inevitable. What surprised me most was how quickly people's perception of me shifted, almost overnight. Those who had dismissed me so casually now spoke my name with careful respect. Those who had remained silent during my struggles suddenly leaned in, eager to be part of the story they had once ignored. But by that point, external validation no longer held any sway. It never had been the point. I had already completed the hardest work, the private labor of rebuilding my identity, brick by brick, without applause or recognition. I had reclaimed my voice, my boundaries, my sense of self, and no one else's opinion could undo that. I shifted my focus forward, not backward. I no longer measured my life by what had been taken, only by what I was creating. I began shaping a future rooted in intention, in deliberate choices, in visions that extended beyond immediate gratification or fleeting approval. I imagined a life where my pain would serve a purpose far larger than myself. A life where my story could become proof that dignity does not dissolve in devastation, that strength does not demand acknowledgement, that survival can evolve into influence. I was no longer interested in winning arguments or proving others wrong. I was interested in building a legacy, a quiet, unassailable testament to resilience, wisdom, and the power of trusting oneself above all else. And for the first time, I felt the freedom of knowing that my life, my choices, and my integrity were entirely mine. Standing on the edge of resolution, I understood something that would remain with me long after the final papers were signed and the doors closed behind me. The greatest victory had never been about money. It had always been about reclaiming what no one could take: my voice, my intuition, and my sense of worth. The woman who had once been expelled from her own home no longer sought permission to exist boldly, unapologetically in the world. I had learned that endings are rarely punishments. They are invitations to rise, to reflect, to rebuild with the clarity that only absence and trial can provide. As the final outcome approached, I felt no desire for spectacle or revenge. My success would not mirror his arrogance, his need to display, or his hollow triumphs. It would be quieter, yet infinitely more formidable, rooted in restraint, in integrity, in the depth that comes from surviving and learning. I realized then a truth I had known only in fragments before. Power gained without character destroys, corrodes, and isolates. Power earned through endurance, patience, and unwavering self-respect, however, transforms. It strengthens, uplifts, and leaves a mark that no wealth or ego can erase. And in that moment, I knew I had already won, not in gold or acclaim, but in something far more enduring: the unshakable certainty of who I had become. The confirmation arrived on an ordinary morning, delivered in a calm, measured voice that carried extraordinary weight. Each word landed deliberately, leaving no room for doubt. The ticket was verified. Ownership was indisputable. The fortune that had been celebrated so loudly, paraded as someone else's triumph, was legally and unquestionably mine. When the call ended, I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not celebrate. I simply sat in silence, the quiet stretching around me, filled not with exhilaration, but with profound meaning. For the first time, I understood the weight of patience, the value of restraint, the hidden purpose of every hardship I had endured. Every moment of waiting, every pang of betrayal, every night spent in loneliness, every silent tear. I saw them now not as obstacles, but as preparation. None of it had delayed my destiny. It had sharpened me, refined me, readied me for exactly what was coming. And in that stillness, clarity crystallized. Timing is not about speed. It is about readiness. It is not about forcing results, but about ensuring the self is strong enough to receive them with integrity intact. I was ready. Not merely to receive wealth, but to wield it wisely, without compromise. To honor the journey that had brought me here. To step into power fully conscious, fully grounded, fully myself. For the first time, fortune did not feel like a prize. It felt like alignment. When the truth became public, the reaction was swift and unavoidable. Shock rippled through the same circles that had once applauded him, murmurs of disbelief replacing the cheers that had celebrated his supposed triumph. The confidence he had worn like armor, the self-assured swagger, the impervious smirk, crumbled under the weight of scrutiny. The narrative he had so carefully constructed collapsed, piece by piece, revealing the fragility beneath the bravado. The man who had spoken endlessly about power, who had paraded wealth and influence as proof of superiority, now stood exposed, stripped bare by facts he could not bend, manipulate, or ignore. I did not confront him. I did not demand an apology. I did not seek revenge. Closure did not arrive in words. It arrived in clarity. It came in the quiet recognition that truth, when aligned with patience and integrity, has a force far greater than anger. Justice, I realized, does not require cruelty to be complete. Watching the illusion fall was not satisfying. It was sobering. I saw clearly how easily arrogance confuses noise for strength, performance for substance. I saw how quickly the facade dissolves when confronted by facts, patience, and unshakable self-possession. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Power is not what others believe you to possess. It is what you cultivate within yourself. Steady, quiet, undeniable. And nothing, not even the loudest illusion, can take it away. With the fortune finally secured, I made a conscious choice. One that would define not just what I had, but who I was becoming. I refused to let money turn me into someone unrecognizable, someone whose values could be bought or compromised. Instead, I treated it as responsibility, not reward, as a tool to shape impact rather than indulgence. I invested with intention, channeling resources into education, rebuilding communities, and empowering women who, like me, had once been silenced or overlooked. Every initiative was guided by a principle I had learned through hardship. True power is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you protect and create. I moved quietly, deliberately, avoiding spectacle and applause. My actions were guided by values forged in adversity, discipline, patience, and the unwavering insistence on integrity. I understood fully that wealth without ethics is hollow, and that success without compassion is fleeting. Every decision I made reflected the woman I had guarded fiercely when everything else was stripped away. The woman who had survived betrayal, isolation, and doubt now guided every choice, ensuring that prosperity would honor her journey rather than erase it. In building this life, I realized that legacy is not defined by fortune alone. It is defined by the courage to rise, the wisdom to act, and the integrity to transform pain into purpose. Looking back, I no longer see a woman who was expelled from her own home. I see a woman who was redirected, pulled, almost violently, toward her true purpose. What once felt like rejection revealed itself, in retrospect, as protection. What once felt like loss unveiled itself as liberation. Losing that marriage did not diminish me. It saved me. It saved me from losing myself in a life built around someone else's ego, someone else's illusions. The pain, sharp and unrelenting, stripped away all pretenses, all illusions, and introduced me to a strength I had never known was mine. I learned that some endings are not failures. They are interventions, necessary, deliberate, even merciful in ways we cannot always see at the time. They shut doors that must be closed so that new paths can emerge. And sometimes, the most painful doors are closed not to punish, but to prepare us for something far greater. A doorway so vast, so aligned with our truth, that it would have remained invisible had we not been forced to let go of what was no longer ours. I am no longer the woman defined by what was taken from her. I am the woman who discovered what could never be taken: her courage, her clarity, and her unwavering commitment to herself. Today, my story is no longer defined by betrayal, money, or revenge. It is defined by transformation, by the quiet, deliberate choices I made when anger felt easier, when bitterness whispered that I had been wronged, by the insistence on dignity, even when the world seemed determined to strip it away. To anyone who feels discarded, underestimated, or silenced, remember this: your story is far from over. The moments that feel like loss may, in truth, be preparation. The experiences that seem unjust may, in time, reveal themselves as alignment. And no amount of power, money, or betrayal can touch a destiny guarded by integrity, patience, and self-respect. I did not just reclaim a fortune. I reclaimed my voice, my future, my agency, and my life. That reclamation was not loud or performative, but quiet, unshakable, and complete. It is a victory that no one can diminish, a triumph measured not in wealth, but in clarity, courage, and authenticity. And that, above all else, will always be my greatest win.